We're back with Mythic Dungeon International for our final series of the day to USAE-Gold and No Girls Allowed. And this is going to be another elimination round, as we'll be seeing who will move on to face up against Pain for Femme tomorrow. Hello, everyone. I'm Jack, and joining me right now, we've got Sloot, Zyronic, and Tettles. And my friends, we're going into Shrine of the Storm. Friends, that's right. That's right, buddy.
Work acquaintance.
No. Shrine of the Storm we haven't seen just yet here, Tettles. Skips galore. We're having Tyrannical Skittish, if I'm not mistaken, under that
Raging.
one, with the Arcane Essence. So we already have the Arcane Emissary under this one. We've already kind of done the Arcane Emissary on live servers today, so a lot of times the spawns aren't too bad in this dungeon.
Yeah, this dungeon in general is mostly open with Beguiling. There's no Beguiling week that's like abnormally awful for Shrine of the Storm just because of how open concept it is. Normally you can like skip some of the more detrimental Beguiling mobs. It's going to be interesting to see what teams end up looking to pull in terms of mini bosses because of the count rebalance that we harped on so many times coming in 8.2.
Sorry, Jack.
It's like pointing. I mean, I
just wanted everyone to admire your beautiful face while the camera's not on you. But
that's right.
The thing I'm worried about, you guys keep dancing around it, man. Raging.
Yeah.
Even if it's not fortified trash, we see how dangerous the casters at the beginning, actually throughout the entire dungeon, are for the tanks. So I don't know why you guys keep not mentioning this.
Especially when you have the mini bosses.
Yes,
I agree.
All right, I've taught you.
Let's take it away in Shrine of the Storm.
And off we go. We see an Unholy DK already on the side of USAE. Nothing present for No Girls Allowed. That is also running a double road comp, but they chose to go with the Windwalker. Immediate snap coming out for a lot of those water blasts. Zyra, your pen is never coming back from dropping it off the desk. USAE 2%. Nice safe pull that we've seen them play before in their earlier series today. They like to take it nice and slow. No Girls Allowed. Zyra, as one of the BlizzCon contenders that they are right now and how desperately they need to place well in this tournament, not exactly the best performance from them earlier today.
Yeah, they just looked not up to snuff. Like the dungeons that we had in the first match for them against Method E, like they just didn't look like they were very well practiced, or they were like kind of maybe had some nerfs coming in. And we see it again here. Trell going down on one of the first pulls of the dungeon. I was about to say that Shrine of the Storm, we've seen them run this dungeon in the past, and it seems to be one of their better dungeons. But maybe I was like mentally caster cursing them because we've seen them have very good runs in this dungeon. Fortunately, they are able to kind of pull the pull back together. But I mean, that's an early death. It's shaky already.
Shaky already, and there's a second one right now as Undead goes down. Trell goes down yet again. And you guys remember about 30 seconds ago, before this match started, when I mentioned that raging with these casters is very, very dangerous. Well, you can see exactly just how dangerous it is as Trell get dumpstered twice in a row there. Undead, of course, being the brunt of aggro that dropped immediately, because as soon as he died, there was 4 raging mobs without aggro. So they're trying to salvage the rest of this pull best as they can right now, but they need to get interrupts. I actually think all the attendants that cast Water Blast are pretty much gone right now. Only the Spiritualist is here, so they're able to finish this up as the less dangerous mobs are here. But those Water Blasts are a man with raging, let me tell you.
Yeah, I mean, I agreed with you too, so I think I'm all on the right here as well. Yeah,
we'll have to get Tettles later.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's probably what we're going to see from them is that they're planning on probably doing as little of this early trash as possible. We see usually sometimes teams will do 2 of those snap skips in the cauldrons, and then they'll come down and do this snap pull near Windspeaker Hellas. But they're actually opting to just go for a safer pull, probably because of that Raging Affix. If any of these extra casts go off, they're in big danger. So like we mentioned earlier on, they're just going to play safe because of that raging.
Yeah, safe because of the raging, but Tettles was mentioning earlier that a lot of teams have restructured what they pull in this dungeon, and they're more aggressive with mini bosses. But those mini bosses, they get raging too. They're part of the trash affixes, not part of the boss. So that's going to be pretty dangerous. Imagine Heldis with raging, or even the Guardian Elemental. I don't think anybody's going to touch the Guardian Elemental under raging circumstances. Edel going down just as Bloodlust is popped. There is no way they are continuing this pull right now. Absolutely no way they can do it as a 4-man, especially with a warrior that just doesn't have this same kind of self-sustain that other tanks do. They can mitigate an excellent amount, but I mean, they're trying whatever they can to get out of this. Trell, likely, I'll have to double check, but likely is running the Urshan Trinket. that kind of salvages a bit of the issue that prot warriors have with self-sustain and self-healing, but too much damage is going to come in. We are in a tyrannical environment, and I don't know how they're going to even heal through the transition phase should they get through it. This is going to be a huge time sink, and there's no way. Trell goes down, Undead goes down. It's going to to be full team wipe here, while USAE, slow and steady, winning the race. They're at 20% trash right now, and they're working their way towards the boss.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way to reset that boss outside of just dropping combat on everyone with Shadow Meld, so that's literally all they could do there. And it took until Trell and Undead went down before both of the rogues decided to get out of combat, and Dilemma vanished, and Sistara used his Shadow Meld, so they ended up dropping combat there. And this is kind of not what you want to see from them, because the game that we're going to see from USAE is that they're just going to try to go for their normal, safe, small routes. Now, unfortunately, we do see 2 deaths on the side of them while they try to do their skip here, unfortunately, to that Tide Elemental, but that's a third of the deaths that No Girls Allowed has doing their normal strategy.
Yeah, no, that Tide Elemental is dangerous. I mean, that's why everyone skips it. Having that, I forget the ability name, but the one where you get bubbled, thrown up in the air, and slammed on the ground. Water something. You got it? Okay, let me know when you get it, because I know you're thinking hard about this one, Zyra. USAE manages to salvage the rather poor skip that they did, but only 3 of the members died. Fortunately, Riptar was not one of them, and now they pull the 2 Spiritualists along. Well, actually, the Templars in there. There's a 2 Spiritualist Templar that patrols up and down, and the Attendant are all in there, so a lot of dank damage can come in later. They have to make sure to interrupt those mending rapid casts that will heal mobs for a pretty substantial amount of health coming out of the Ritualist. Now, No Girls Allowed is back in action. They have 6 deaths on the board now, and Aquasir is at 83%, but man, sorry, I don't think Edelweiss could have died at a worse time. She died the second they popped Bloodlust. I mean, that pull was just dead at that point.
You couldn't have timed it more perfectly if you were trying to sabotage the group. That was just really unfortunate on their side. Now, the Bloodlust loss is not that big of a deal because you do pull Windspeaker Heldis onto the boss, and she kind of gives you a Bloodlust-like effect every single time she drops that haste rune on the ground. And so at the end of the day, it's not like that big of a loss. That haste rune more than makes up for the Bloodlust as well. You'd just be stacking that on top of the haste rune, and there are some diminishing returns, some heavy diminishing returns. Like, for instance, once you get to GCD cap, having that much haste doesn't really matter. So it's not too big of a deal. But I think the biggest problem is the fact that they pretty much had a full team wipe and everyone had to run back. That probably cost them a minute in general, just in time. Now, the fact of the matter is, because USAE just seems like they're a little less experienced in terms of speedrunning dungeon, No Girls Allowed is probably still going to be very far ahead in this dungeon. You can see they're 50% ahead on the boss right now. But this is something that No Girls Allowed has to have in the back of their mind. Like, we just need to play safer. Maybe this is going to work against a team that's, not as experienced as USAE-Gold, but you have to play better if you want to have any chance of even thinking about qualifying for this game.
No, you're absolutely right. I know they're probably kind of down about it today. Tranquility coming out of Edelweiss. Now, the chances of them hitting GCD cap is pretty low. You need 100% haste for that. But perhaps in combination, I think it was 25 on the ground, plus you have 30 from Bloodlust. It's still a pretty tall order for them. So they should combine pretty well. But they didn't get their Bloodlust, so it doesn't really matter. Something that USAE does have, they did manage to get their full Bloodlust out. They have a couple of apprentices on top of it. Now, I don't think they pulled Hellas. No, this Heldis is still down there for them, so they're, once again, slow and steady wins the race. Yeah, I don't know, Zyra. I mean, it gets in their head. A lot of damage coming out of Heldis. And the danger here that I just mentioned, once again, is raging. Is Heldis in that raging area? Even if he is, actually, we do have the suit from Edelweiss. So on that one mini-boss style mob, shouldn't be too dangerous now that she's on top of it. But it's still doing quite a bit of damage. And Accusir is at 15%. They're done with their transition phase. Mike, unfortunately, going down on the side of USAE. They do have access to the battle res from Riptar, who's not sacrificing it just yet because he wants to heal through the Gale Winds coming out of Windspeaker Heldis first.
Yep, and there's no real inhibitors to this week. Like you mentioned, the Soothe coming out for Raging, so Windspeaker Heldis is going to be able to be kept alive the entire time. There's no bolstering, so they don't have to worry about killing her off too early to bolster the boss. They're just going to go ahead and cleave these down evenly on top of the 2 Gale Caller Apprentices. I mean, I really feel like the affixes this week, once you get past the caster section of the dungeon, is going to be a lot easier than past weeks. There's not going to be as many inhibitors. Like bolstering we've seen in the previous few weeks for this dungeon I think it's a bigger inhibitor than Raging, because most of the melee mobs at the end of the instance, you can definitely kite those around and do bigger pulls. But bolstering limits your pull size just completely. You can't do these massive pulls that we see a lot of teams like to do in Shrine. Unfortunately, inside of USAE, Mike has gone down during Aquasir. They don't have a battle res available for him, so it's going to take them a little bit longer to do this pull, and it's just a little bit unfortunate to see from him.
Yeah, he had just gone down. He was rezzed by Riptar, and then he went down again, so that's double death there for a USAE, and they're not going to be able to recover from that. They're going to have to format the rest of this boss, and you're absolutely right. I mean, Raging's not as limited as bolstering, and huge pull coming in here for No Girls Allowed. This is really dangerous, but the danger comes in when there's such a large mass of mobs. That raging absolutely trucks your tank. We saw it earlier. Trell died twice. And the reason I mentioned the mini bosses are particularly dangerous, yes, you can soothe them, but if it's combined with a massive pack of other raging mobs, you kind of want to separate them. Your tank is just not going to live very long. And speaking of living, USAE not having a great time here. Looks like they're going to get a full team wipe off after they've already entered transition phase, after their bloodlust. So that's going to be a huge cost for them and probably a huge breath of relief for No Girls Allowed that had a very shady start to the dungeon. They're backpedaling now. Trell's making sure to get away from these mass amount of enraged mobs.
Yep, and this is kind of what you can see here. Like we mentioned, you can pull massive amounts of mobs here, and you can just kite them around. You've got the Typhoon from the healer, you've got the Ring of Peace from the Monk. There's a lot of kiting that's able to be done, and there's nothing really stopping you from doing this. They don't have any of those mechanics that we see in dungeons like Motherload, where the mech jockeys will grease gun the closest target. These are freely kiteable mobs. The only thing that you really have to worry about are those whirling slams, the area denial on the ground. So you're very free to just pull as much of this trash as you want. And just kite it around, which is what we see Trell doing exactly here. This is just kind of perfect strategy for this style of dungeon on Raging. The reason we saw those early deaths is you can't kite casts. They're going to cast on you if they can see you, and we saw what happens to groups that don't deal with interrupts very well. Tank just instantly flops over.
Well, I mean, you know, the thing is you can, but the way you need to do it is you need to outrange the cast. And we've seen teams do that before. A lot of tanks have done that, both in Season 2 and now Season 3 of the Season 1 and 2 of the MDI, rather, 2 and 3 of the Warcraft seasons. But, you know, what you got to do is you got to get out of casting range. The mobs try to cast on you. They fail because you're out of range. They try to run up to you. They recast again. So you kind of kite them at 40 yards away, essentially. But none of the teams did that. Obviously, Trell didn't do that because they snapped at the top of the stairs, and there's just not room for you to kite unless you go back into the first room and line of sight. No Girls Allowed looking like they're finally shaping up here as they do the aggressive pull on top of the trash leading up to the Guardian Elemental, along with the Guardian Elemental. So they've separated well to avoid the danger that I was talking about earlier, where they have everything enraged at once. So they got the enrage on the common mobs first. They're going to cleave those down, which leaves them available to just soothe and to get a lot of healing in on just the Guardian Elemental, which is about to enrage.
Yeah, the only thing I'm worried about, of course, is if that soothe doesn't get off before the next Shipbreaker storm. They're going to end up taking a lot of damage, but it looks like they're just going to get the insta-soothe out from Edelweiss, and she'll just have to heal. What?
Nope.
Okay, there it is. Whew. I think that was the worst one tick. That was dangerous. If that Raging goes off during the Shipbreaker storm and you take one tick of that Raging storm, you're going to see everyone instantly drop to like 10%. We almost saw that.
No, we did see that.
Did we?
A tick went down. I think one of the rogues got chunked for 60%. She immediately, if another tick had gone off, that would have been it. It would have wiped the entire group. So Sistara, unfortunately, procking a cheat death, just for good measure at the end of that, as they stealth and head right through the trash in front of I was going to say Lord and Lady Waycrest, but in front of Gale Caller Faye and, of course, Brother Ironhull. Now, most teams we see do this trash, but what we want to see from teams is that kind of low 60% before they go up to do the bridge, or for their bridge skip. So they've already done a substantial amount of trash because they've done Guardian Elemental, they did that huge aggressive room, they killed Soren, they've actually killed all 3 mini-bosses at this point.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier today, where when we were talking about that Motherload, when they redid mob counts, this was one of the dungeons that was vastly changed. They changed a lot of the mob count into the mini-bosses, and you can see just how much trash percentage they have because they killed those 3 mini-bosses. They can skip a lot of trash at some point in this dungeon just because of what they ended up pulling here. Being at 60% when you get to this boss is pretty ridiculous. Now, something interesting about No Girls Allowed, they were one of the very few teams in the West that didn't adapt to that Eastern strategy we saw back in East Region Week 1, where a lot of the teams ended up standing on top of that rock you can see on the far side of the screen, and it allows you to just completely ignore the tornado section of this fight. No Girls Allowed opted to never go for that strategy. They opted to just do the boss normally, which set them behind, I feel like, in terms of this dungeon.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why they do that, because even if you do it perfectly and you avoid all the tornadoes, just the sheer chaos that they cause. I mean, look at all the kiting that's needed to be done. The rogues are running around, the monks running around. You're oftentimes going to disconnect your melee range from the boss, especially the Windwalker, just because you can't have access. You don't want to get hit by one of those tornadoes, especially if you have a slicing cast debuff on you as well. So Star, I believe, just gets chunked there by one of them. You see how dangerous they are. So another one right now, so he almost gets killed there. Trell gets frontaled by the boss right now, too. He gets hit by one of the tornadoes, and things are just so chaotic right now. He gets shield wall down at 10%, rallying cries on top of it in desperation to try and stay alive. And Zyro, this is all stemming from what we just talked about. Now, the only person, of course, if you do that kind of edge or cliff strat, is the tank, but all you have to do is dance back and forth about 10 yards, and you're largely safe from it too. You only have to do that in order to drop Brother and Ironhull's rune on the side, bait it to the side, and then you just go back up. So I'm not really sure. I'm sure they know about it.
They have to know about it. Maybe there's just some inconsistencies in their strategies. Maybe they feel like their strategy in this dungeon is already good enough. Like, for instance, if you're in a situation where your strategy is good enough, but you have to get it so much better to beat the best teams, and it has to get that much worse to beat the worst teams. Maybe you feel like you're in a situation where, you know, getting a 30-second increase, which is probably what that would give you, isn't necessarily the best thing. Interesting. We somehow Bloodlust has been popped when it still has a minute and a half left on the timer. I'm not sure what's going on there, but we don't see Bloodlust, or we don't see the bigger like player frames on the player models when they have Bloodlust pop. So I'm assuming they didn't Bloodlust, and that's just a little bit of a UI bug. So interesting to see that. And this is another strategy that we also see No Girls Allowed almost always opting to do. They will go for the sort of less efficient strategy of single targeting down Gale Caller Faye, but they will almost always pull some amount of trash on top of Brother Ironhole. And this is a lot more than they normally pull. Usually we only see them pull 2 apprentices on top of Ironhole. They're pulling 4.
Yeah, they're pulling 4. So if I'm to try and solve the Scooby-Doo mystery here of the Bloodlust, they popped Bloodlust right after Edelweiss had died the first time. Edelweiss didn't have Bloodlust pop, so they used it for her here. She actively has Bloodlust, but the rest of the team does not because, of course, they're still on cooldown from earlier. So these remaining 48 seconds are for the 3 DPS in the tank and not the healer. So that's probably what happened. I was thinking, I was like, is the Legion majoring back or something? Did we mess up, Zaro? But a bit of death here for Undead as well, and I believe they commit their battle res to it, or one of their battle reses there. They're now at 7 deaths on the board versus 6 as USAE starts to try and chew through the rest of the trash here, going down into Runecarver Storm's room. They sit at 9 deaths and 42% trash.
Yep, and because of the amount of trash that No Girls Allowed has pulled at this point, they're at 70% trash. This is a lot higher than you normally see. I believe most teams are usually at about 60 or 61% when the spots goes down. They're going to be able to completely skip all the Enforcers and pull pretty minimal bridge trash, because the sort of metric that you want to get to is when you get to the third boss, you want to be at around 82 to 83% trash. If you're in that area, you're good to go. You'll finish your trash count off by pulling eels. So I'm assuming they're just going to skip everything here and go straight to the bridge with their Shadow Melds, and it looks like that's exactly what they're going to do.
That is what they're doing, as Troll runs in and drops a Thunderclap just to make sure nobody else grabs any spot aggro by accident, and into the bridge they go. Heroic Leap, I believe, is on cooldown, but nonetheless they auto run up the bridge, and there's the Shadow Melt to drop all aggro right now. They've safely gotten to the bridge, and this 10%, or let's say 8 to 9% extra that they have, will allow them to skip one of the bridge packs that most other teams, at least this season so far, have been killing because of the rebalance of trash in the dungeon. But certainly they don't need everything here, unless they plan on not doing some of the eels at the end, which is really weird because eels are easy for them. Enraging on eels actually could be pretty scary for the tank because of the shadow debuff that they do, but we'll have to see exactly what they end up doing here. As a Rip Mine cast goes off, unfortunately, it is reflected by Trell, so that was planned on the side there. Well done by them.
Yeah, but this is a dangerous pack in general. I feel like we don't give this pack enough credit. We always talk about it's just dangerous, but there's a lot going on here, especially on Raging. You can see just one of those Void Bolts going off on Sistar. It did 60% of his HP. They really have to make sure that they're using... Edelweiss has to make sure she's soothing the right targets for sure. But if any of these Rip Mines go off, if anyone gets hit by one of these Mental Assault frontal abilities you can see going off on the far side there, you get hit by those in Raging, you're one shot. Just you're dead completely, or your cheat death is procced. There's no coming back from that. On top of that, you're stunned for 6 seconds. You don't want to deal with any of that. This pack is that pack is a lot more dangerous than we see them than we see these teams, you know, pull off, and that just kind of goes to show how good these teams are. Now they are at that 81% mark. I believe if they really wanted to, they could just pull one side of the dwellers and they would be done. But I mean, it kind of seems like it's just too easy to finish these off. I don't know, Raging, it can be a little scary, I think.
Raging with these lashes, I mean, everything can be scary with Raging. The more mobs you add, the more out of control Raging gets. Yeah, you do have Soothe from the Resto Druid, but it's on a 10-second cooldown. You can only do it every once in a while. So, I mean, this strategy here is fine, though. They just killed everything before they got killed, kind of thing. 83% for them. They'll get to probably about 86 with the remainder of this. So they are over percent just by a bit, but it does allow them the luxury of not dealing with one of the eel packs should they choose to once they get there. They've, of course, already started the RP for Lord Stormsong, the third boss of this dungeon, as USAE has done they're about to do their skip here on the Guardian Elemental, so they are avoiding that one because they know the danger of combining it with anything else, which actually not. They're just skipping by it. They don't opt to use their Soothe here, and they just head on in. And I believe Yuant has actually... he procced his cheat death, so he survived. Everybody's safely past the bridge now.
Yeah, that was scary. I think it was like 2% there with his cheat death proc. He probably should have gone on, oh, what's the healer doing down there? Can he get up from there?
I mean, he's just having a good time.
Oh, he just fell to his... Oh, that's unfortunate.
Actually, well, he's not having a good time at all.
No, but nobody on that side's having a good time. Looks like it's going to be a full team wipe. They pulled aggro. Ooh, kill? No, not going to happen. The rogue can stay alive, stealth off in the corner, but they're just going to have to wait for their healer to come back, which is going to be a huge time loss from them. Now 13 deaths on the board for USAE. No Girls Allowed, just trucking right ahead on Lord Stormsong.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what happened there, and certainly the pull afterwards wasn't intended. I was thinking maybe they were trying to die on purpose so that, you know, you could battle res the tank Etma, and Etma might be able to res Riptar, but either way, didn't work out. So that's 13 deaths, as you mentioned, Zyro, and we can see that Riptar is running back right now. I'm not sure if they pulled Sorn, so we'll have to see as soon as they get into this downstairs area. One of the rogues is alive, and he's likely going to help skip the Guardian Elemental yet again on the bridge, because we know that has True Sight. No Girls just trucking along here, 50% on Lord Stormsong, as they do well to avoid all of those balls to the face. Now, USAE is getting ready here with the Guardian Elemental in just a moment, and it looks like he's going to run by because he does have, okay, so he does have his Shadow Meld available, runs right by, pops that. I'm not sure why he popped it in the middle of the area. Now he's, okay, he went back and he cats out. That was really scary. I thought the patrol was going to overrun him there for a sec.
It's scary on both sides there. Dilemma actually ate one too many of those balls to the face, like you're mentioning, and he ended up stunning himself and getting him down to 25%. But, you know, that's kind of one of the strategies we see on this boss, where teams will opt to put the first Ancient Mindbender in the pool so that they can save those Shadow Balls for the next Ancient Mindbender. Because what you end up having to do when you're mind controlling this fight is you have to break yourself out by dealing damage to yourself. And the most efficient thing is by running through each of those Shadow Balls, which will do about 5% of your max HP each. Now, of course, not enough of them spawn for every single Ancient Mindbender, so there's just a strategy where instead of using the balls on the first one, they'll go stand in the pool to DPS themselves down, and then the second person can pretty much instantly get themselves out. The third person has to have some cleave done to him, or he has to wait for the next set to spawn. So he's probably going to grab that one, walk into melee, let people cleave him out. But that should be the last Ancient Mindbender they get. And this is just pretty textbook strategy. Outside of that stun on Dilemma, no real issues on Stormsong.
No issues at all, as USAE is dealing with a lot of the apprentice trash below Galecaller, Faye, and Brother Ironhall. So got to keep an eye on them, as most of them in rage right now. There's going to be a lot of damage coming in on Etma as No Girls Allowed gets ready to jump into the pool. That not okay. There we go. the storm had not quite faded in it yet. We've seen historically some rogues jump in there quite happily and then proc their cheat death on the way to the last boss. But no problem for them here, as No Girls Allowed swims through with that awful swim form. I don't know why they don't use the dolphin. Quite honestly, it's just much nicer. But No Girls Allowed 87% here versus US Army, who is sitting at 64.
Maybe it's like the small form for druids. Maybe it's like the odd jobs of druid forms, you think? maybe that's what it is. We see Edelweiss dropping out of form, going into cat form. They're going to be going on to, and they're probably going to be doing something similar that we see for every team pulling off here. They don't have to worry about bolstering so much. Their ad position doesn't have to be perfect, but they're probably going to go for a similar strategy that we see most teams do, where they'll pull 1 or 2 packs of eels into the boss. They'll cleave it down with the boss. Probably not get the boss that low. Most of these teams can't really. I don't think we've seen a single team commit to one phasing outside of Abracadabra a couple weekends ago, but unfortunately we weren't able to see them pull it off entirely in that run. But none of these teams have really gotten to the point where they're even close to one phasing this boss on 18.
No, the only time we've ever seen the one phase is in the 17 in the first cups, as you were saying, and that was only one time. I forget which team did it. But since then, you're right, there were some teams primed for it, as you mentioned, Abra being one of them, but we just never got to see them fully flourish. And to really do it, I think you need to take advantage of the Unholy DK and the Eel Cleave on top of it with the remaining 2 Eel packs after the first transition. Certainly not something we're going to see out of No Girls Allowed right now, as they're about to hit their first transition, and Volzith is only getting down to about 75, maybe 76%, and now they'll go downstairs. Now, I'm a bit worried about some of the danger of the trash coming up after this because of the raging, but as long as they get the interrupts on the Forgotten Denizens, then the Sunken Denizen can just get a nice soothe off for Edelweiss.
Yeah, important to mention, Edelweiss, when she did die, it was very early on in the dungeon, so she's been saving up the staff procs since then. She should have a pretty significant amount of them, to the point where she can probably one-shot an entire pack of eels, or an entire wave of eels, however many they choose to pull. If she does end up proccing that as Shara staff, it should be able to go off, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Unfortunately, on the side of USAE, it looks like the tank and one of their DPS went down. Fortunately, they were able to reset the boss, but they popped their Bloodlust.
Yeah, I mean, they exactly the issue that happened with No Girls Allowed. It completely wasted Bloodlust right now, as I mean, just full team wipe, or not full team wipe, but half team wipe plus the reset, and they're gonna have to start that one again with no cooldowns available, no Bloodlust available, nothing. No Girls Allowed now has finished off their transition phase and is grabbing both eel packs on top of the trash right now. Edelweiss having the 9 stacks available, and we're gonna see if she uses it on top of the eels and let it proc, and she's spamming, and there it is. It procs it off and absolutely just annihilates all of the eels, and about 50% on each one of those 3 denizens. And I mean, you love to see it, Zyro.
I was pointing out the regrowth spam. She was getting rid of all of that mana. She was ready to pop off, and oh man, 200k DPS come from a healer. Yo, healers OP, nerf them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should.
Yeah, they definitely should be nerfed. Right, Jack? Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, definitely. And now, it's just interesting to see, even with the cleave and no Unholy DK, they were able to get the boss right down to 76%, which is not too bad if you're trying to put yourself in a position for one-phasing this boss. I think when this was on a 17, we saw people getting the boss to about 72, 70% or so, just to even have a chance at one-phasing the boss. Getting it to 74 on the higher level, on the 18, you're getting to the point where you're, like, maybe talking about it. Now, of course, they didn't have Bloodlust available. Well, our timer says they didn't have Bloodlust available, so I'm not quite sure if that's accurate, but it looks like they didn't have Bloodlust popped. And they're definitely not going to get getting the boss close enough. We've seen so many teams at that mid-70s%, only getting the boss to like 20% or so, even after one phase. You can't even talk about one phasing when it's not getting even close.
All right, Yarzire. And then Bloodlust was popped for the remaining 4. We do know that the timer is a bit wonky and skewed here just because Edelweiss didn't benefit from their very first Bloodlust. And they are indeed going to have another phase here. Now, with how quickly they killed the eels and the 3 denizens there, you almost want to argue that they could have, there's the real Bloodlust for the remaining 4. You actually could have argued that maybe they should have just combined the boss on top of it. I mean, they one-shot everything almost, and the boss would have taken a huge chunk of damage. Now, is that worth the risk? The boss is at 20%. Would Edelweiss have done 20% of the remaining boss's health with her hit? No, and they're so far ahead in the dungeon, why risk it, I suppose? But just something to think about perhaps for the future.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, yeah, it's going to be another like 700k boss damage or something, I think, at this point in the dungeon. If it crits 1.4 million, that's how much that staff will do over the course of a dungeon. It's a pretty ridiculous amount of damage. And important to mention, it is increased by that debuff that she has on. You can see that 9 stack. Each of those stacks is 20% increased damage. So she's doing pretty much 2.8. She's doing 2.8 times the damage she normally does. She's doing a lot of damage right now. So that's kind of what makes the staff proc work so good for that AoE pack. Now, of course, second intermission phase is done, no problems there. Boss is at 20%. They should have no problems phasing it here. And I mean, no girls allowed. Outside of the early hiccups in this dungeon, they kind of showed us some of the strategy we'd like to see from them. They do have a good run for this dungeon, but unfortunately just the raging made it so difficult to see that early on.
Yeah, early on, it gets in your head, and I know they weren't particularly happy about their performance in the first series of the day. So hopefully this would be a nice pick-me-up for them as Volzith dies and they finish off the remaining eels for their 2% in order to take this series 1-0, while USAE still working on the second boss there just because they had that wipe earlier. But they're not going to have time to finish the dungeon as No Girls Allowed takes the first game.
With a very decisive victory onto that Shrine of the Storm run. They did have that issue early on the first boss, as you guys mentioned previously, but ooh, that staff proc, I love it. You love to see it, Tettles.
Yeah, that only rivals the underrot pad on spore staff proc that we see some weeks too.
Oh, no.
So yeah, that was an interesting run. I think we were talking about it a little bit before the match. Raging in Shrine of the Storm seems actually very deadly with some of those mobs. Just getting casted on as the tank can be very dangerous in some spots. No Girls Allowed with their early death on Edelweiss with their Bloodlust popped puts them in a pretty bad spot, but overall they recover in a really nice way. They end up pulling this Ritualist, which in this raging environment is pretty good because you can actually stand inside of that ward and take reduced damage. So this is actually a better pull to do on raging than most other weeks. And then No Girls Allowed follows it up with a pretty big initiate pull into Brother Ironhole and Gale Caller Faye, merging a lot of trash for efficient cleave into this boss pack. Overall, it was just a pretty clean run from No Girls Allowed, and they showed why they were trying to contend for 4th, but they still had some issues that for a team that we want, that is trying to push for BlizzCon and is trying to do a lot this week, they still had some issues in Shrine of the Storm that they just need to not be making.
Yeah, it does start showing, a little bit of lack of composure and maybe a little bit of lack of focus onto those things, and how cataclysmic some of these early deaths can be on the rest of the run. So in many cases, it's one of those things where they kind of learn their lesson, they learn what they're doing wrong, and how are they going to be able to pick up and fix that, as Waycrest Manor is going to be next for them. And there's so much damage, we've seen time and time again how deaths can happen onto that instance. So we take a quick break before we go into it. Don't go anywhere, guys. Next game coming up on the other side of this break. No Girls Allowed is up 1 against USAE-Gold, as Waycrest Manor is going to be up on the next dungeon for us. We have a Fortified Bursting Explosive, and of course that nasty, nasty Void Emissary. Hello everyone, I'm Jack, and join me for our next game. We've got Sloot, Zyronic, and Tettles. And explosives, Tettles. Explosives everywhere.
Yeah,
and
bursting.
And bursting. Well, we're even seeing Dilemma tweeting earlier this week where he's like, I see explosives in real life.
Well, it's because like Rogue's job in a lot of dungeons is like dealing with explosive, because you have so many tools just to be able to do good damage to explosives. So you just have to make sure that you utilize your outlaw rogues as well as possible. So yeah, him dreaming of explosives, probably not healthy.
so much. I mean, you know, it must be really nice for you, Ironic, just being in the Warlock slot. You're just not good with any of that stuff, so you just deal damage.
Well, here's the thing. Back in my day,
That's
the
true.
explosives were green, and I used to use those for boss damage. I'd drain those, give me that buff. If anyone else ever hit them, I'd yell at them because I wanted to proc my set because I wanted to fear the explosive. I'm not sure how that works.
Resident Sleeper.
It gave me the proc anyways. If anyone ever hit them, oh man, I was angry. But you know, once we start getting to the AoE, nah, that's not my problem.
All right.
Oh, you just mean once it turned orange, you were just like, nope, not for me on that one. Well, those explosive orbs are for Dilemma, and he's going to have to deal with plenty of them as we're getting ourselves going in Waycrest Manor.
Starting up here, we can already see the same comp coming out of USAE. However, No Girls Allowed has switched over to actually quite a few swaps. So we have Trell on the Brewmaster. Sistar has now gone from Rogue to Unholy DK, and Dilemma has gone onto the Havoc Demon Hunter, which is quite good for dealing with orbs as well, if I'm not mistaken. So between him and Undead, they should have not too much trouble handling most of the orbs as they're trying to pummel down that first Void Emissary on the stairs. Both teams doing the same thing here, but Mike, unfortunately, getting chunked for damage and going down. Riptar following suit. They can indeed release at the beginning of the dungeon. Everybody's going to follow suit as well. They're trying their best to recover from this early pull, and I'm not sure if they're going to be able to pull it off as they kite around in circles. As long as that Void Emissary is dead, they should be okay. So if the Void Emissary is dead, they just have to be careful with any spare explosives now.
I actually like the comp that No Girls Allowed is running here. If I remember properly, wasn't No Girls Allowed the team that ran like the triple Demon Hunter in Waycrest a couple weekends ago?
Maybe.
I think they were, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. Maybe Tuttles will have information for us after the dungeon. I think they were. Oh, Jack is giving me a thumbs up. They definitely were. So, okay, cool. But it makes sense. The Demon Hunter in bursting is definitely, it's a class that can live through it on their own without too much healer attention. One explosive going off, not that big of a deal. Leech yourself right back up with that soul-rending talent. It's just a good class in general, but the thing I like about it in this dungeon, it's going to buff the damage of that Unholy Decay. Whenever you go to those big pulls, it's going to give that extra 5% damage for the Unholy Decay. It's just a win-win for this particular comp.
Right, you are. USAE's already rushed into the first boss as well, something that No Girls Allowed is already working on. They've just gotten Sister Malady down past her first phase and are starting on Briar right now. They have to be careful with those Jagged Tettles coming in, as most of the team is already chunked low. They need a Dispel here on Edelweiss going into this phase. Last thing you need is one of the Jagged Nettles hitting somebody that's low. It'll finish you off. A lot of explosives coming out here for USAE as we see Zubs, go down and cleave them. Now, big difference here already between the two teams, minus, of course, the 4 deaths. Zyro. USAE has committed their bloodlust to this first boss, something that No Girls Allowed has not done, because likely, as we've seen with other teams on Waycrest Manor, they're saving it for that aggressive Void Emissary pull in the Courtyard.
I'm sorry, I was a little caught off guard there because I heard you say Jagged Nettles and not Jagged Tettles. I was very confused for a second.
I had to bite my tongue.
Okay,
Too many times at once.
Unfortunately, USAE did have their tank go down. They had to quit their battle res to him. But on top of that, their monk went down as well. Or sorry, one of the rogues went down as well. They just, excuse me, sorry, came out of nowhere.
Shock.
Unfortunately, they don't have a battle res for him. I don't know how they're going to get through this boss with only 2 DPS. There's a timer on this boss. Anytime one of those small bars below the HP bars fills up to full, the boss will cast Dark Ritual, which is going to be a one-shot on this difficulty.
Yeah, that Dire Ritual is rough. And not just that, but they have a bit of leeway in terms of it's like a 5-second cast or something like that, so it buys you a bit of extra time. But Sister Briar's still not at 50%, and she's reaching about 80% energy, as we can see. There's no way they're going to survive that. Maybe AMS, Cloak's available for subs. You have AMS for Mike. I'm not sure what Riptar is going to do. I guess he can go bear form and pop Barkskin for himself. Edma should live as the tank, but I mean, Zubs goes down as well. This is likely going to be a very slow wipe for them, as No Girls Allowed has finished off the first boss and is heading into the hallway filled with the guards and captains. As they run by, we see a cage go up there from Dilemma, and they run around the corner. They're going to Shadow Meld this off, and they're going to get ready for their aggressive pull in the Courtyard.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely going to be a wipe for USA. They have there's no way they're going to meet any of these DPS checks at this point. Sister Selena's now about to reach max energy, but we're going to be deprived of the Dire Ritual cast, unfortunately, because they do end up full wiping there, so we're not going to see that. So 9 deaths on the board for USAE, unfortunately, but No Girls Allowed, like you mentioned. They're gearing up to do this massive Courtyard pull. I'm interested to see how exactly they plan on using the Bloodlust, if they're going to use it for this first massive pull with all of the Hounds, if they're going to use it to heal for the bursting, or if it's going to be a different strategy entirely.
Looks like they're opting for a bit safer here as they get all of the Hounds into the room first. They're going to cleave those down, and I believe there's a Thorn Shaper in there as well. Yeah, so just a bit more of an aggressive pull, not as aggressive as you've seen from some of the other teams. They're looking to cleave all of this down in here to start pre-popping his anti-magic shell, just to make sure none of those bursting stacks connect with them. Trell and Edelweiss getting chunked, but we do have Tranquility popped in here from Edelweiss just to make sure the group is nice and healthy after that quite heavy bursting stack. So that pull there was the most dangerous part of the bursting here in the courtyard. However, the rest of it with and explosives too, but the rest of it of the actual dangerous mobs are still residing outside.
Yeah, but this is probably one of the only Void Emissaries we almost ever see being killed in any of these dungeons, just because it's so easy to line of sight. You can line of sight on either of those two pillars on the left or right side you see here. So you really don't have to ever lose any melee uptime as a melee player. You literally miss like one melee swing, half a GCD by running around the corner. So it's just a super safe pull in general. The only thing that's not safe about this pull is all those spit debuffs coming out from these maggots here on the ground. You can see two of them on Edelweiss right there, just ticking for a lot of damage here, especially in this fortified setting. Having those spit debuffs on top of already getting some bursting stacks from dying mobs, there's a lot of residual group going on. This is star dropping incredibly low there.
Yes, the star dropping low, Trell dropping low as well. A blade of stacks have already been consumed for him, and just a huge amount of damage coming on the team right now. You can see they're just not letting up either. More trash keeps joining on top of them. We of course have the Thorn Guards on top of it. Infected Peasant's going to split into 3 maggots as well. So just there's no rest here for Edelweiss, unfortunately. She's down to half mana, but they should be able to stabilize now as most of the dangerous parts of the pull are done. The Void Emissary has disappeared, and they're looking to stabilize here as USAE is having a second go at the Sister Triad right now. They're about to get Sister Briar down to 50%. Everyone nice and healthy this time as they look to start their second phase of the fight.
Yep, I mean, it looks like they're going to be totally fine here. The only thing they have to make sure they do is just keep everyone alive. As long as you keep everyone alive, you should have no problem missing that Dire Ritual check. The only problem I see is maybe Selena if they don't deal with the soul manipulation very well, but outside of that, they should be totally fine. Over on the side of No Girls Allowed, Edelweiss has procced her staff in this hallway, which is a pretty interesting spot to do it. She did it from going though, which is something I wouldn't expect you would do early
I don't think it was on purpose, I'm not going to lie. I mean, she consumed a lot of mana keeping everyone alive there, and I think there was not really much trash left over. Certainly not worth proccing the staff this early in the dungeon on. Now, very different pull from what we've seen from other teams, but similar pull to what we've seen in the previous season in terms of aggression here, combining Matron Brindle with all the trash on top of Soulbound Goliath. This is very dangerous here, especially with the amount. Bursting, not the end of the world here. There's not too many mobs, but explosive plus Matron Brindle fortified plus Soulbound Goliath is a lot of damage for Trell to handle. Now, Brewmaster is usually quite tanky, obviously, but if that Purify gets too high, it just gets too high, and it's going to be a nightmare to heal. So far, they're doing quite well with it, making sure to interrupt the Thorn Shapers. Trell can also lend a hand with Dispelling Disease on Dilemma, which he doesn't do because, of course, they're in an argument over who ate last night's dinner. But should be able to heal through it. Trell's fine. He gets his energy off, and I mean, explosives are handled well. It could be kind of scary there for most other tanks.
It looked very scary for a second. The Star was in so low, but instantly got back to full. I mean, yeah, that's just kind of how Brewmaster works, right? Your health just kind of seesaws until you get healed to full, and then it goes back to doing it again. Especially with the Resto Druid healer, which is almost all hot damage and wants to actually do damage while they're healing. They kind of it's really weird. Edelweiss just doesn't get to do that much damage on this pull purely because she's been healing Trell almost the entire time and doing residual group damage. But you can see how scary this boss is if you don't reset those stacks.
Brewmaster, they don't yo-yo as much as you think in the sense that they have a very ramped up damage in terms of damage intake. It get worse and worse and worse. That all comes from their stagger. If their stagger gets higher and higher without purification, that's when you see what's happening to Trell right now. More and more unhealable damage, and then you start seeing that yo-yo effect. I mean, as strong as Brewmasters are, you don't have unlimited resources. So if a pull that's that dangerous, if he mismanages brews between Iron Skin Brew and Purifying, or if he just was getting trucked so hard that he didn't have enough brews to spare between the two of them, you're going to see those kind of effects coming in. Finally, they stabilize. A Blade of has popped for Trell. He's not going to have that again for 30 seconds. That's one of his Azerite traits. Edelweiss doesn't have Staff, doesn't have Undulating either. Soulbound Goliath is at 25% though, so they should manage to finish that off. And Zyra, contrary to other teams that we saw earlier, they actually didn't deal with the Void Emissary, in this courtyard.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what their strategy is here, because they did deal with the one in the corner that we see most teams deal with, but not dealing with one in the courtyard. Maybe it's because they actually dealt with the trash around Soulbound Goliath that we see most teams end up skipping, even with the explosive ethics. I believe we saw Pain for Femme actually just wipe to that in the previous dungeon. So maybe they just decided that the explosive is too RNG whenever they pull off that rogue skip around Soulbound Goliath, and because of that, they just don't deal with his Void Emissary because they've dealt with extra trash that way.
I like to see this aggression coming out of No Girls Allowed, but it's starting to get a bit out of hand as explosives are going off left and right. Edelweiss finally manages to catch up, but their spit debuffs going out as well. Trell has an Infest. The boss goes down before it gets way too crazy. Infest went out on Trell, plus the bursting stacks, plus Soulbound Goliath hammering him in the face, but that actually was very close to being a wipe. Edelweiss almost completely out of mana. I like to see this aggression coming out of the team. It is something that I'm sure they've pre-rehearsed, but that was a close one, Zyro.
I mean, that's scary. It just the amount of residual damage that goes off on the group with this affix, we can't talk about this particular hallway enough in terms of the danger. The spit debuffs from the maggot are just like probably the worst part of this entire hallway. If somebody gets 3 or 4 of those spit debuffs, they could just die to that alone. And then when mobs start dying and you get the bursting on top of that, if one explosive goes off, you're just gonna die. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. So just the amount of spot healing that Edelweiss had to do on the entire group there, the amount of burst healing that had to come out, the amount of she had to make sure she was focusing particular targets that had spit debuffs. There's just a lot going on there, and you kind of have to give a shout out to the prowess of Edelweiss there on a healer. She's doing incredibly well in this dungeon.
She is doing incredibly well. No Girls Allowed here, just ramping up in trash percentages. The hit 47. USAE having a bit of struggle on the side here, and what is honestly one of the most dangerous parts of the dungeon in terms of incoming tank damage. They've accrued now 23 deaths. So if you're just joining us, and we'd like to extend a welcome from all the StarCraft 2 viewers that have just joined us now, we are on what could be the final match of the day here between USAE and No Girls Allowed as they battle it out in Waycrest Manor in this best-of-3 series.
Yeah, unfortunately, during that, Trell did end up going down. They had to commit one of their battle reses to him. Just too much tank damage coming out there, too much group damage. Couldn't keep him up. So a little unfortunate, but they do have another one available should they need it. They just didn't pass that 10-minute marker, so they have another one available now. And we're gearing up now that we see they're about to go into Rawl's room. They don't have the Bloodlust available, unfortunately. This is what we normally see saved for this for the Unholy DK damage. So I'm interested to see how this goes without Bloodlust.
How this goes without Bloodlust is it could go quite south. Sorry. We'll have to see. Spit debuff still keeping the group relatively unstable here for No Girls Allowed as they've cleaned out the remainder of the hallway, and Trell is poking about on the inside of the Raw room, looking as to what might be the best way to go about this, hopefully well pre-rehearsed. Now, Brewmaster particularly good against dealing with Enchanted Emissaries because of rushing Jade Wind. It looks like he won't be the one dealing with it as he moves away from it. We can see it Chains of Ice that had gone up from Sistara, rapidly slowing that mob down. Now it takes 20 seconds for it to fade and deplete its energy bar. Pretty aggressive pull coming in. Not as aggressive as we've seen from some of the other teams, but certainly a lot of tending that you need to do for the rest of the group. Dampen Harm here was popped from Trell right now, getting some of that extra mitigation that he can from his talents. It's a 2-minute cooldown.
Yeah, it looks like they opted to go for a smaller pull in this room purely because they just didn't have the Bloodlust. That makes a lot of sense here. It's just a safer pull. I mean, once again, we go over this all the time, but it's really important to keep hammering home is like no Girls Allowed and every other team in this tournament. Whenever you're playing in the MDI, this is a live tournament, right? There's no delay here. You can have the stream on your other monitor. You can have somebody watching for you and tell you where you are in terms of where you are against the enemy, the person you're playing against, not necessarily the enemy, but your opponent. They could be your enemy. They could
Evil.
be your enemy too. But yeah, just letting you know how you're standing in the dungeon right now, letting you know if you're ahead, letting you know if you're behind, and you can kind of play around that. You can be like, oh, well, we were going to do this insane pull, but since we're 2 minutes ahead, we can just opt to go for a safer pull that we can do 100% of the time instead of going for a more dangerous pull that we can only do, let's say, 75% of the time. It's just, you want to go for the win route instead of just going for the let's get the best time every single time.
Yeah, Zyro, in a tournament like this, winning is important for these teams. Go ahead.
I agree.
Okay, well, I see you threw that right back to me. Okay, roll here 30% right now for No Girls Allowed, sitting at 69%. A couple of the Oozlings are there on the side. Now, they don't particularly add too much advantage. I suppose leaving them alive for a bit for the benefit of the Unholy DK might be nice just to min-max some damage there, but we do know they want to get around the 84 to 85% mark in terms of trash before heading downstairs to Lord and Lady Waycrest, in which they, from that point on, they will get the remaining 100% that they need before dealing with Gorak Tool. So they still have quite a bit of trash left before this in this dungeon, about 14-15% worth, which I would assume would be the kitchen area with all the maggots in there and the Rune Weaver. I'm not sure if they're going to pull anything else from outside. There's still that Void Emissary residing in the Courtyard, though. Probably not the most effective pull. Option B, Zyro, would likely be the Survivalists sitting in the lodge or the living room area.
Yeah, interesting to see. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking they could do. We see Undead running off with the Tricks of the Trade. Definitely going to be that's the plays on top of the bench there. You see Trell standing on top of that, unfortunately, sideways bench, or maybe it's a table. But yeah, how's it unfortunate? Somebody was angry and they flipped the table. That's why it's unfortunate. Table flipping's never good. But of course, the Tricks of the Trade coming on Trell here. They're snapping all of that entire Hunter Lodge room, like you mentioned, to Trell. It'll be a nice and easy AoE cleave, and all the explosives are going to be right here too for Dilemma to dream about. So it should be an easy pull for them.
Dilemma to dream about, indeed. Yeah, nice easy pull coming up here. But I still don't think that's going to be enough. I still think they're going to need to combine some of the trash in the kitchen there. Now, they're likely not going to deal with the Void Emissary, although to be fair, we've seen either strat already today. So some teams have gone in there, cleaved all the maggots and the Rune Weaver on top of the Void Emissary. Some have pulled everything out of the kitchen. We'll see what they opt to do as long as they get to the important threshold of that 84-85% before going downstairs. USAE still working here through the Courtyard right now, getting ready to get onto that Soulbound Goliath hopefully soon enough as they deal with some more of the trash. They sit at 18% trash versus No Girls Allowed 77%. Dilemma unfortunately gets clipped by, I believe, Spitz plus a combination of the Void Emissary's explosion and succumbs to dying. 3 deaths now on the board for No Girls Allowed. They're not, I was about to say they're not going to commit their battle res to it. I don't know if that's really the best idea. The battle res did go up, but he didn't accept it because he can't just release from the beginning of the dungeon and come in.
Or they could just res him if they all shout him out at the same time here, which looks like what they're. I think that's what they're planning on doing. It'd be the safer play for sure. I'm not sure what's the start. Maybe they're gearing up to do another trash pull here that they're going to combine with something. I'm interested to see how they do this. But yeah, it looks like they did commit the shadow meld there. Edelweiss went out for the AoE res, getting in from inside the room there. Yeah, he went down to a 3-stack of the bursting plus 2 spit debuffs, and then he also took the void to the face. Just not what you want to see.
Yeah, it seems like Sistara's character is missing some armor. I'm not sure how he can kind of battle in the kind of transmog that he's wearing right now, but he seems to be doing it quite effectively as he top damaged in that last pack, Zara.
Well, you know how they say in MMOs, the less armor you wear, the stronger you are. I think that's what's going on.
Ah, yes. It is working quite well for him. 3 deaths now for No Girls Allowed, as I mentioned, heading downstairs here. Now, they're a bit shy of percentage, but they do have the option. Well, I say 84-85%, not including the sister on the side, the Mark sister, plus there's a Void Emissary hiding in the corner. I'm not sure if they're going to commit to that. Doesn't really seem like the most effective or safe pull to do. So they might have to double back and head upstairs later on and finish the percentage, unless I've completely gotten the percentages wrong. That is what the teams have been getting to earlier today. No Girls Allowed here, still the 80% trash, and they've pulled the boss on top of the trash, Lord and Lady Waycrest, with the trash in front of it.
Yeah, I mean, you can see how dangerous this is for Unholy DK. He already chewed through his entire MS. It looked like he used his health potion earlier on, too. Like, he took a lot of damage early on while they were doing that cleave. But at the same time, you can just see, once again, we talked about it all day, the Unholy DK, cleaving stuff on top of the boss is their forte. They're really good at this, getting the boss damage in while also cleaving everything down. Just so much residual AoE damage. And because of that, because of the Unholy DK, they're able to pull this pull off without the Bloodlust that's now coming after 2 seconds. And they're probably going to have that available for either Gorak Tool with the Gloom Horrors. I don't really think they're going to do that. They don't need to at this point.
No, they're light years ahead right now. There's no point in them doing anything risky, but what is certain is that they do not have enough percent that the Gloom to only kill the Gloom Horrors. In fact, I don't even think they have enough percent to deal with the Mark Sister and the Void Emissary in the corner and the Gloom Horrors. They're still missing a bit, so they're probably going to have to go upstairs at some point and deal with a bit of extra trash. Not sure if miscalculated or just part of the strategy we've seen, at least more commonly early in the previous season 1 of this year, the spring season, that some teams did backtrack after Gorak Tool and kill some of the survivalists, whatever it may be, but it's really not been the norm anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what they would pull because they pulled the survivalist. They used the snap spot to pull the survivalist, so they'd have to run like maybe to the courtyard to pull extra trash to finish off their mob count.
They
can
go upstairs too. Remember, upstairs to the
true.
right, there's another survivalist pack plus a Rune Weaver.
Yeah, you're right. That could be what they pull, but I feel like this is just so inefficient. They can get away with it because, of course, UAE isn't having the best dungeon we've seen, but like this is, once again, I think in the grand scheme of things, when you're looking at No Girls Allowed, who were pretty much fighting for a BlizzCon spot this weekend, this is not kind of the routing and strategy you want to see from them. This is like, it's really unnerving to see them play like this.
It is unnerving, and at this point, I would assume that they'd consider their day a bit of a wash. You know, hey, let's just, don't think about it. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll sleep on it. We'll get some practice in, and just don't worry about today. We managed to squeeze by. We're still in the lower. We can still compete, and just try to get it out of your head, because certainly it's not. Actually, I want to say it's probably one of the worst performances we've seen from them all season so far. So I'm sure they're not impressed with their own performance, and hopefully they can sleep it off and come back strong tomorrow. But we're not done here just yet. USAE, though, just having so many troubles here as another mass stealth comes up from them, and they head on back into the courtyard after having a wipe, if I'm not mistaken, in Rawls Hall. Mass pull of the Gloom Horrors going downstairs right now, and I guess they are combining with the boss, but we've seen Ursula's Vortex popped by them, and maybe they're just skipping it. No, they're not. They're just combining everything together, pulling it to the side, and we're going to see Edelweiss jumping up on that lantern in the corner, which prevents the Gloom Horrors from jumping, but they have to be careful of the explosives around the corner, so they have to hug this wall for any of the explosives that have come in.
I blinked for 2 seconds, and they went up to 92% trash. Where did they get the 6% trash from? I am very confused right now. Hopefully Tettles can, because they were 86% trash while they were clicking Lord and Lady Waycrest. Right?
Yeah, they were.
So, and they went up to 92. I don't know what they pulled to get there. Hopefully Tettles is smarter than we are, because I have no idea what they pulled to get there. But at 92%, these Gloom Horrors will finish off their trash count, and they'll get them to 100%. And this is actually beautiful. If they're able to pull this off, get all these Gloom Horrors down, this is a great pull. The hard part is going to come from these bursting stacks that they get when these Gloom Horrors die. They're going to be taking a lot of damage here.
Yeah, a lot of damage coming in as their Bloodlust goes off, but no problem for Edelweiss as she pops her Tranquility to heal through all of that dangerous damage. Trell is now stabilized as well. Huge absorb coming in, likely from the Edict trinket that he's wearing. We know it pulses every 40 seconds, absorbing a huge amount of physical or magic, depending on which way you want to use the use of the trinket. Edelweiss proccing your undulating ties, but looking to stabilize here as there's 4 slavers now in the group. They didn't manage to get the torch down on them, I suppose, and these slavers cast Death Glare, which Death Lens, excuse me, that just stuns you for a huge amount of time.
That DPS increase for both the Rogue and the DK, just something else to think about. Because they can now be stunned and knocked back by pretty much anything in the game. I think that was a change in one of the 8.1 patches. This is just kind of one of the more easier bosses to deal with the trash here. This is one of the things that I like to see a lot. Teams really optimizing for extra damage here.
So I think what we missed is, I'm sure you'll talk about this, Tettles, but I think Matron Alma came with from upstairs with the boss, so I'm not sure where they got their percentages. I'm sure somebody else got it. We can always watch the replay later, but we were fixed on USAE earlier. But I think Matron Alma came from upstairs on top of the boss too, because earlier wasn't the Void Emissary in the corner with a bit of that trash. But Gorak Tool here, 4% for No Girls Allowed, and they're going to be finishing off this match and sweeping the series 2-0 to continue into what, for them at least, will hopefully be a better day tomorrow.
Without a question, No Girls Allowed taking that series on Waycrest Manor, showing that they still have some mistakes that they need to account for, but it also just kind of gives them a bit of time to breathe here on this one, Settles.
Yeah, I mean, No Girls Allowed needs to show up and be a little bit better than what we saw in their first couple of matches today. Overall, though, it felt like that Waycrest Manor was a decent thing. And as to go for the Matron Alma pull, we've seen this before where Trell will actually walk up the stairs and pull Matron Alma, transcend back down, and I think Matron Alma will snap to them and just instantly teleport. So it's a pretty efficient pull from No Girls Allowed, something that's facilitated by that transcendence from that Brewmaster Monk. But overall, this dungeon was pretty much the No Girls Allowed show. They ended up pulling a pretty sizable pack into Soulbound Goliath, something that we don't normally see. We normally see teams they'll just pepper in trash as it comes, but we see No Girls Allowed here just doing it all at once, trying to brute force it, which may be a little bit better for explosives because of what we ended up seeing a little bit earlier with Paint for Femme. Then No Girls Allowed does this table snap that we've seen done time and time again, and then just following it up with the Lord and Lady Waycrest trash pull into the boss as well, really making good use of this Demon Hunter and Death Knight combo, doing a lot of AoE, making sure that you kill explosives, and overall, this was a decent dungeon for No Girls Allowed. They had 3 deaths, but it wasn't anything that was too alarming or jarring.
Sure, and that's where it goes to show, all right, they're getting kind of back into their groove a little bit more, and with that win, they're going to be going up against, but this is going to be Paint for Femme as we take a quick look at our bracket for tomorrow. Yes, they will be facing up against Paint for Femme, so our bracket, if you're taking a look at it right now, is jam-packed full of some amazing games coming up. Paint for Femme, No Girls Allowed, both have an opportunity to clinch a BlizzCon spot, but if 40K finds some way to be able to beat Method EU, which is an incredibly tall task, and it's incredibly surprising they're in the lower bracket to begin with, if 40K wins that series, then they've clinched that BlizzCon slot. Abracadabra Method NA, for once, Method NA hasn't gone against Abra or Method EU on day one. I think that's the first time maybe ever that has happened this year. They have not gone against either of them in the first day, but they will have that rematch once again in the upper finals tomorrow to decide who goes into the grand finals a little bit later. So we've got a jam-packed day tomorrow, Sloop.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of, it's a bit scary for both Paint for Femme and No Girls Allowed because half of it is in their control. They need to win the match, both of them, in order to have any chance of BlizzCon. And on the flip side, if 40K wins, then it doesn't matter which one of them two win because 40K is qualified.
This is worst case scenario for both of them. Whichever one wins, great. Like you mentioned, if 40K wins, they don't get to qualify anyways. But if Method EU wins, you have to play against Method EU. But, I mean, having to play against Method EU is better than not being qualified at all. But it's just it's a tall task for them to have any chance of making it still.
It's kind of interesting as well, since you mentioned that it could be that Method EU is the spoiler for everybody in some kind of cases, where if they have it where Method EU progresses forward, yes, they knock 40K out of the tournament, but if they knock out the winner between Paint for Femme and No Girls Allowed, then it seals 40K's fate as well.
Those are exactly the kind of guys to do that on purpose, to be honest.
I guess it kind of depends on if they show back up with their Blood Death Knight Hunter combo that we saw today. The Hunter seemed like it was pretty decent. The Blood Death Knight,
the Bloodlet still did fine.
It did okay. Yeah.
It did what it needed to do, and honestly, in the dungeons they had, they weren't horribly behind by any means. I mean, they still performed well, but it seemed like once they got to that Toll de Gore, they said, okay, that's enough.
Yeah, that's what
Fun time is over.
Yeah.
It's time to return back to business now. We don't want to get knocked out completely or anything like that. So.
That's right. We'll have to see who does get knocked out completely tomorrow. Be sure to join us at 11 a.m. Eastern Time for more Mythic Dungeon Invitational